Hello, everyone. Tanya's back with us, and we are continuing our saga of EarthBound, the genesis of the Great Experiment. So, you've met a little bit of Ellie and Blue Crystal, and I just want to explain that this series is a trek for Ellie. He's the main person or the main being in all of this, and his experiences through Earth's evolution, humanity's evolution. He's taken through timelines, he's taken through dimensions, and this beginning trek takes him from the depths of underneath the Tibetan plateau all the way to where we now call England, and who and what and how and what he learns about himself and everything else on that trek. So, Tanya, do you remember anything? Do you have anything to share about any beings that you remember in that first book that made an
of
impact?
of Ellie's initial the beginning of his great journey. So many of the beings, but I will say with lots of love in my heart for all the beings that I had no idea how much I loved dragons until I read EarthBound and got to be part of the co-creative writing of EarthBound. A significant character who comes into the books, a significant being who came into Darlene's life is a gorgeous big huge dragon named Espiritu, who becomes another mentor of Ellie's, among other things. And what I can say is that, so one of the first skills that I learned in what my teacher would say, remembering the telepathic abilities that all humans have. One of the first skills that I was taught is what she referred to as identifying one's energy signature. So quite simply calling in a being and asking them to stand with you and connect heart to heart and just notice, what do you feel? What is their energy imprint? We do this with humans, right? You meet somebody new and you feel their vibe. So I was learning to do that. And like I already said, with Blue Crystal, there was this amazing feeling of just being held and safe. And when I met Espiritu, it was like a level of joy that didn't make sense in my body. In fact, I remember that it was deep winter, and I struggle in winter to find my joy sometimes. And it was like, I can remember once I got to those pages where I got to start meeting the dragons, it was like, the whole world needs to go away because I need to hang out with dragons. And another piece that has been so cool about the co-creative writing experience is not only did I feel like as I began to meet and work and honor that the beings were sharing their stories through Darlene, and that they had accepted me as a supporter in the translation and the architecture of the story, so that it could be followed and make sense and bring readers all the way through it, was that in the places where the storyline had missing pieces or felt incomplete in some way, it was never, oh, let me think about what would make sense for the next plot line. It was, let me ask. And often when I reached for questions, sometimes they would give me direct answers, but more often they would give me questions to put in the manuscript to dish out to Darlene. And in the early stages, it's like she'd give me 50 pages. I'd give her those, 75 pages back with a bunch of questions, and those would quickly grow into 150 pages. And it was this relationship of asking and being shown. And I feel like what Espiritu, the dragon, brought forward in me was a deeper connection to my own sense of creativity, the energetic of the dragons in holding an element of balance for the earth. There was a deep longing in me to want to come home over and over and over to the dragons. And I would say that getting to work in co-creation with Espiritu planted some really powerful seeds that actually became a separate book of my own, right? That has a lot of dragon energy and dragon themes that run through it. And so it's again this eagerness of the support that is available to us to share, and the way in which I could really feel that in my energy body, in my mood, in my engagement with both what was happening on the page, but also in my life beyond the page. What was it like for you when you first met Espiritu?
Well, you bring up our co-creative process, and I talked about the many levels of how this comes together, and it feels like that is something that has been taught to me from the Council 28 and the Evolves, is that relationship within yourself, with others, with beings, is this figure eight or this infinity symbol of that you ask a question, it comes back. You ask a question, it comes back. And it's woven into the fabric of who we are on the multidimensional level as well as our internal experience. So I just wanted to bring that up. That was something that I just realized, like, wow, we're doing pretty good with that. When I met Esperanto, I was I was told by the council at that time that I needed to go to England, and we did that. We went to England, we went to Ireland, but in England at the time we were going to visit Stonehenge, and on the bus ride to Stonehenge there was, with my eyes open, there was this feeling that this storm of dragons flew overhead. Like they were just, and I kept looking out the window going, okay, where are we going and who is this and what's happening here? And I did meet her at the Chalice Well. Was the second day that I think we were there, and Ellie was with her, and she was huge. So I sat by myself and tried to gather my thoughts together because she was just very overwhelming. She shrunk herself down so that I could be more comfortable there, and I was working with Ellie to say, like, who is this? What is this? And the blue crystal, not the blue crystal, SP comes in. I call her SP, Esperanto, comes in as the last of the Council of 28. So this was back in 2016 or something like that. Excuse me. So that was a time that I really needed to allow what was going to happen. And I remember writing about this because they told me from the beginning, we want you to write every day about what we're telling you, and somewhere along the line you'll make sense of it. And so I wrote this whole thing about what it was like in meeting her and having Ellie together and all of that. And I put it in, not in the draft, but I remember saying, hey, do you want to hear how I met her? And you were like, yeah. I put it in there, and tell me what you thought, because this changed the whole dynamics of the book. I'm much more like Ellie, that I'd rather stay invisible, but I don't think that's the case for me in becoming all that I want to be.
Yeah, and so many layers, right? So this was a huge moment for me as a co-writer, as someone that was trying to hold the bigger vision of what these whole books are. We weren't yet calling them the Multidimensional Memoirs because it hadn't yet fully registered for me that these were memoirs. We're writing, this is sci-fi, this is fantasy, this is something else, and we're following the main character who is a reptilian, and he's being guided by a speaking blue crystal, and there was nothing about that felt like, of this physical world that I am familiar with. And I had heard Darlene, of course, multiple times refer to these other incarnations of her, and that there was connection. And then it was like in our off the page conversations, and it was like, wait, you traveled to England and you had a conversation with Espiritu with Ellie, and you have this written in your journals. It was like, wait a minute, if these are the multidimensional memoirs, your story really matters, right? The human being who can be the bridge that translates and brings through all of these other experiences. And so you'll see when you read the book, we have excerpts from Darlene's journals in there, where we started to realize we're just like Ellie, who would prefer to stay invisible. Those of you who are writers who are watching that, right? The hesitation or the fear sometimes to actually put our full vulnerable self on the page. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Darlene's story needs to be a lot more present in these books. And I feel like, I just want to name, again, what I love so much about story is there's no prescription about what you have to believe in order for story to land, right? Mm-hmm. And if your body wants to take in the multidimensional memoirs as sci-fi fantasy, which is how I started, beautiful. Let that be so. And at the same time, I think that one of the things the books invite us to do is to question the limitations of our belief system. So just in my own life story, and I'm not saying this is what the truth with a capital T, my experience, right, was in my younger life, I didn't believe in reincarnation. I kind of thought this was a one-time rodeo. You do the best you can, and then you become worm food. And then I did a deep dive into spiritual teachings, and I lived off and on for a while at Kripalu Center for Yoga, and developed and deepened a meditation process, and listened to a lot of different spiritual teachers that spoke about reincarnation. And I remember one of my teachers saying to me, like, I'm never ever going to tell you what to believe, but I am going to encourage you to observe the ways that your beliefs shape your perception of reality. Right. So now my experience opened, and I started to realize, well, when I try on this possibility that maybe I am a soul who lives many lifetimes, that maybe it makes sense, because sometimes I sit with, I feel like I'm holding on to all this trauma. And of course I'm a human, so I've had positive and negative experiences, but some of the stuff felt like, this doesn't even feel like this is coming from my lifetime. Why do I have so much pain connected to this theme? I can sure track it back to this lifetime, but it felt beyond that. So when I opened to getting curious about the possibility of reincarnation, it opened doorways and pathways for me to do a lot of healing. And it wasn't until I started studying telepathy, and very specifically started working with Darlene and in co-creation with these books, right? And I think that's no coincidence that, at least for my brain that was in so much doubt and disbelief, the invention of the Webb telescope. So I don't know how many of you have had time to geek out and look at the extraordinary photographs, actual photographs, right, and videos that are being taken from so much further than the human eye has been able to see before. And the Webb telescope, as it reveals with absolute clarity the number of galaxies, billions of galaxies, and how many planets are in every galaxy. And if we can be humble enough to acknowledge that Earth is one tiny little piece of our solar system, which is one tiny little piece of something so much bigger and so much bigger, it had never occurred to me to consider, even after a decade of being open to and leaning into the healing potential of expanding my consciousness, to acknowledge maybe I've lived many lifetimes. I had never once considered, could I have lived a lifetime off planet Earth? Could I have, the poetry of us being stardust and of the earth and of the stars, like, what does that mean? And frankly, when I look at the Webb telescope and the infinite possibilities of what's out there, I think it's kind of a human norm, at least over the last several hundreds and thousands of years, for us to shrink the potential of what is. So to work with Darlene and to start to fall in love with beings who was more comfortable for me to call characters, to look at in fiction, as made up at the beginning, but then to start to see, as I became to know and love Ellie, and then grew in my love of Darlene, and starting to see, oh, I see Ellie in you. Oh, I see how that work that Ellie did in chapter 7 actually reflects perfectly in your life here. It was this tremendous opening. Right. And I will just say that in my continued evolution and my discovery of what are the strategies and healing methodologies that have created powerful influence in my life, that by opening my curiosity to that possibility, right, that all of our incarnations might not have been human, and that these multidimensional memoirs are one human's multidimensional experience of being a soul committed to becoming all she can be, opens doorways for humanity to think bigger and more creatively about where we come from and who we can become.
Thank you, Tanya. I just, two things. One is, when I was 10 years old and I created an ice skating rink out of tinfoil. It didn't last long, but when I looked out the window, I made the declaration, I want to keep creating, and I want to be all that I can be. I had no idea what that meant, but it was that seed that was planted, I think, for everything that is now. But as you're talking about you as Tanya, I didn't believe in incarnation. Thank God I didn't know that, because I don't think I would have, when you talk about it, and I gave her that book, I gave her that, this is everything that's happening, because I had the opinion, she told me to write it this way, so she knows what I'm about. She knows all of this. I think, you know, like you would have been my worst nightmare to hand something to somebody that had no belief or understanding or any of that. And yet you stepped into it. So I thank you, you know, for working me through now that I understand it better, that you didn't really have that concept. You were just new to it. You know, you were new to it, but you didn't really understand it or embrace it or any of that. And I was under the assumption, I don't think they would have ever let me believe anything different, that you had this. Oh yeah, we're on the same team.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I would say that when I met you, um, I did believe in reincarnation, and I had done a lot of past life work with different kinesiologists and healers. That was profound for me. Um, but it was like it needed to stay within the limit. For my brain at that time, it needed to stay within the limitation, which already felt huge. Like, oh, maybe I was, a Neanderthal, or maybe I was, lived in these different times. But I hadn't, and even in my telepathic training, working with other teachers who are working in the spirit realm, there was still, then it was for, focusing more on angels and spirits of the land and things that felt like still a little more within reach of what my belief systems were at that time. And meeting you, who was just so much more fluent in multidimensionals, in planet hopping, and working with different species in the galaxy. Yeah, it stretched me, but I think it speaks to the potency of the teachings and the medicine that comes through the books and the beings. Um, yeah. So thanks for trusting me. It's been a ride.
Yeah, it was, I had a little bit of like agina, you know, like, oh wow, I handed her that, but it was old, you know, it felt old, but thank you. Thank you for persevering with and expanding as we both did. So let's check in at another time. I think it's a good place to finish for today.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.